If you have ever wondered about some of the complexity in regards to Marvel and how specifically they dealt with characters and still are dealing with characters when it comes to Sony, well, we actually got some insight into this due to the former lawyer from Marvel who was connected with the company and dealing with character rights for the last 25 years. Most of you know that before Disney ended up buying Fox, that many characters, specifically ones that fall into the mutant side of things, were tied up with Fox. Now, of course, this also included other characters. Years before that, it was Daredevil and also the Fantastic Four were tied in there as well. Now, along with them, other characters were also tied into it, and parts of characters were tied into that as well. For example, elements of Namor were owned by Marvel Studios, Universal, and Fox. And then you have the Sony side of things, who at one point owned Ghost Rider. They were also associated with Thor at one point, and way back when they signed that whole Spider-Man deal, that granted them any character that's ever created connected to Spider-Man in any way. So again, there's a lot of complex things to deal with here. Well, this former lawyer who's been overlooking this for a better part of the last 25 years talks a little bit about these character rights, and in a Q&A/Ask Me Anything, he disclosed some of the issues, and he specifically brings up the X-Men, for example. And one of the characters he brings up is Quicksilver, which was part of the dispute when he was there. And he confirms to us what we thought was the truth. And essentially, yes, Quicksilver, Scarlet Witch, and other characters were both X-Men and Avengers. And depending on their first appearance and depending on how they were presented, one studio could do a specific thing with the character, but they couldn't hint towards the other thing at all, ever. And what he's implying here is, for example, Quicksilver in the MCU. Up until they bought Fox, they could never acknowledge Magneto or mutants or anything like that. But after the acquisition, now they can. And it was the same thing over on the Fox side of things. They can mention he's Quicksilver. They can mention that Magneto was his dad. But they could never mention any of the aspects connected to the Avengers or what was established as canon in the Avengers comics. So he reveals that essentially the studios would talk to each other, then they would figure out the logistics, then they would go back and forth between the lawyers, which is what he was a part of, and the discussion would be held between him and both parties in terms of what can we do to make sure that both sides are doing things properly so nobody gets in trouble on either side. And he also revealed that sometimes somebody doesn't own the character, but they wrote them into the script. So then he's the person in the middle that goes to every party involved and tries to work out a deal to make it possible with dozens of other people involved. From logistics to business affairs to the toys to everything. Everybody has to be involved. Now, he doesn't outright say what they're talking about, but this is quite clearly Ego from Guardians 2. Ego was owned by Fox. James Gunn didn't know this, so he wrote him to be an integral part of the story. And then they told him, yeah, you don't own this character. We don't own him at all. And James Gunn was like, so can we make a deal? And then they went and started talking to him, and he started talking to Fox, and the deal was reached for Negasonic, right, in Deadpool 2. So there you go. We kind of got some interesting insight into how this works, and it's more or less what we learned before, just a little bit more context provided now in terms of who's in the middle and how they approach these deals and how they make them possible. And for those wondering, yes, this would also include everything related to Spider-Man. It's all handled the same way.